Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so pleased you've joined me for today's show. Today, we're exploring the location-specific tenancy guidelines for the state of Utah. In all of my location-specific episodes, I've included hyperlinks to that state, that location's resources, and today's episode is no different. So check out the show notes. Each of my location specific podcasts is set up in the same way, answering the same four questions. What are the basics of that location? What are the nuances of that location? Some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant in that location. And then, if you're stuck, where do you get help? In this case, the state of Utah. As I answer these questions, you'll see me screen share all kinds of documents specific to that location, as well as check off items on my bingo card to see what each location has, what they don't, what's different, what's weird. Yeah, all kinds of fun stuff. Over the many years I've been doing these episodes and traveling, I've created a bingo card of standard items I see most often in tenancy laws in different locations. And especially now we're getting around the world. We're expanding now into Australia. So if you haven't heard last week's episode or last episode in the library, because it's all live today, is Tasmania in Australia. That's kind of cool. And by the end of the year, we'll be into Europe. Really different ways that everybody does landlording. But at the very end of this episode, just like the rest of them, I'll go through the bingo card to help figure out what you need to research more, especially if you are a landlord in the state of Utah. But I must tell you, there may be more guiding documents than what I'm giving you here. This is not everything. Even if I get it 100% right at the time of recording, 5 minutes later, it can and will change. You must do your own due diligence. You must do your own research applicable to your own rentals. But this is designed to get you started. All right, so let's screen share. Do. Screen share. And we are going to Utah Code section. Where are we here? Utah State Legislature. Okay, so we've got how many hyperlinks? We've got one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, seven. Seven hyperlinks. So we're going to go through all of these here. And along the way, we're going to start looking for things that are on the bingo card and things that you would expect, like how does security deposits work in this area? What about late payments, late rent? How is that taken into account? Is anything about pets talked about, pet deposit or pet rent? And then, of course, one of the pillars of the episode is the abandoned items, what to do about abandoned items in Utah. So let's go through some of this and then we'll go through the hyperlinks and then we'll see what we are missing. Okay, so this is what we're looking at is an actual law because of course a tenancy law is a law. And so typically we'll go through the law first and then there is some usually more user-friendly guide or sometimes some slicks. Sometimes there'll be some different PDFs to summarize it, which are way more user-friendly than reading a law. So we're going to go through the law first, though. Okay, so establishes right off the hop that the owner's duties, meaning the landlord, if that's you, to protect physical health and safety of the ordinary renter and owner may not rent the premises unless they are safe, sanitary, and fit for human occupancy. And then there is the must-haves: maintain common areas of residential rental unit in a safe and sanitary way. Maintain electrical, plumbing, heating, and hot and cold water. In fact, I'm surprised they don't say running water. That's interesting, but that's okay. Maintain any air conditioning system in its operating condition. Maintain other appliances and facilities as specifically contracted in the rental agreement. Oh, that's right. You've got to have one. Please do not have a handshake agreement. And then for buildings containing more than two residential units, provide and maintain appropriate receptacles for garbage and other waste and arrange for its removal, except for if you have a side agreement, which makes sense. Yeah, so you have to give proper notice for entry. That's on the bingo card for sure. At least 24 hours prior notice. And it doesn't say written notice, it just says notice. And it's got to be something reasonable. And you can't go in at 3 in the morning, right? Like you're going to go in and you're going to go in with the exterminator and treat the units once a quarter, for example, but you're going to go in during the day and you'll do it, at a time convenient for the tenant. It's not going to be at, 3 in the morning, something crazy. Okay, here we go. Application fee, that's definitely on the bingo card. Before an owner accepts an application fee or any other payment from a prospective renter, the owner shall disclose in writing to the renter good faith estimate of the rent amount and the amount of each fixed non-rent expense that is part of the rental agreement. And then the type of each use-based non-rent expense that is part of the rental agreement, the day of which the rental agreement is scheduled to be available, and then the criteria for renting it, including renters' criminal history, credit, income, employment. Yeah, you want to make sure that you've got this posted somewhere so that if you're advertising it saying, hey, here's my criteria. One thing that I've thrown in here recently that's kind of a hot button that didn't realize it was a hot button until I did it, was I've started not renting to smokers. We're finding more and more the biggest cost of turning a unit is recovering a unit after it's been smoked in. And I realize in other places like Tennessee, smoking in units is sort of commonplace, and you'll walk into a unit and it just reeks of smoke. And that's everybody's just sort of like, yeah, okay, well, I don't particularly operate that way, but that's how that region does it. So, but typically, if you put that in there, I will put right in my rental ads, I do not rent to smokers. So if you smoke or vape, please do not apply. It is not a protected class. So for me, I am willing to take that gamble. If someone's going to say, "Hey, I'm discriminating," I'm actually not discriminating. It's a preference for my asset that I'm renting, right? Okay. Let's see. The rent amount and then written disclosure. Da, da, da. Okay. Late fee. Here we go. An owner may not charge a renter a late fee that exceeds the greater of 10% of the rent in the rental agreement or $75, which that's actually very helpful that it's that simple. There's a lot of places where they don't state it or it's kind of cryptic. But an owner may not charge a renter a fine, fee, assessment, interest, or other cost in the amount greater than the agreed to rental agreement and that is not included in the rental agreement unless it's a month-to-month basis and the owner provides the renter a 15-day notice of the charge. Yeah. Let's see. Before entering into a rental agreement, the owner shall provide the prospective renter a written inventory of the condition of the residential rental unit, excluding ordinary wear and tear. So the landlord has to give the tenant a condition inspection and then furnish the renter a form to document the condition of the residential rental unit and allow the resident reasonable time after the occupancy to complete it and return the form, or provide the prospective renter an opportunity to conduct a walkthrough inspection of the residential unit, which is what we do with all our units. We don't do the whole, hey, here's what I think, here's what you think, you've got a week to give it back to me. We typically don't do that. We typically do a walkthrough. Okay, you've got to disclose in writing all these different things, the name, address, phone number of the owner or the agent. And you have to provide an executed copy of the rental agreement. If it's a written rental agreement, and please hear me, if you are doing any kind of rentals, please do not have handshake rentals that are just oral because if they start to go sideways, and it always seems to be those ones, because nobody can remember, they only remember what they want to remember. But if you have it written and you both have it, then it's kind of hard to dispute. Okay, I'm gonna keep going here. Oh, and that's it. So the next one, I'm gonna go back up to the next section though, and it's probably gonna be, so this is the rental failure possession. Okay, so this is where the an owner fails to deliver possession of the residential rental unit provided in the rental agreement. So this has actually happened to us where we had a renovation go late and we had someone set to move in and we were not able to deliver the unit and it was really awkward. Actually needed an extra month. It was really touchy. So we had to deal with that. I think we had another unit available that they were able to stay in temporarily, which again, that's not fun, not ideal. I'm just going to keep clicking through, but I think this is renter's duty, cleanliness, sanitation, and crime victim right to new locks. If there's been domestic violence, then the victim can put in new locks. And truthfully, if the landlord's involved, the landlord can do new locks as well, right? But if the person feels unsafe, then they can at their own charge. change the locks, but they have to give the access to the landlord as well. So I tell you what, I can keep going, but what I'd like to do, let's flip through some of these other resources because if there's a more user-friendly one, we can certainly come back to this. And there's actually a search function, that'll be cool. All right, let's go to the next one. This is utahcourts.gov self-help category. And it says roadmap of the eviction process. Okay, well, we'll do that. Okay, my goodness, wow. Landlord serves a tenant notice to vacate. Nothing is filed in court. So if the tenant leaves, moves out or complies with notice, tenant or landlord can sue for money for damages, including rent, damages to the premise, and return of deposit in small claims or district court. Okay. Or a tenant does not move out or comply with the notice. Step two, landlord files a complaint and summons for eviction in court and has the tenant served. And so the tenant can either answer in the court within 3 days or not file an answer. Either way, he has 3 days to do this. And basically, it walks you through the steps of all of this about what happens if the tenant appears, the tenant does not appear, the tenant wins, the landlord wins, how this works. And if you go all the way to trial, this is actually very similar to how it works in Hawaii. We've done this as well. It's very interesting. We actually got a judgment for almost 10 grand and we were not able to collect. Getting a judgment is one thing and getting money is another. So, all right, let's just go to eviction for fun and see. Oh, by the way, I am screen sharing, so if you're watching this at My Life as a Landlord, you're going to see me as I'm talking. If you're just listening, just know that there's actually a video part to this part. Okay, eviction information for landlords. There's also a link for tenants. And this one is specifically for Salt Lake District Court, for Community Court. And it looks like it roughly follows the roadmap that we just went through, right? And so they're also saying you must get a court order to evict. You cannot do things like change the lock, shut off the utilities, including power, water, or heat, take a tenant's property or harass them or block them from being in their home. That's still their home. When it's a dwelling, it changes, right? You've got to make sure that you are not misbehaving as a landlord. Okay, let's go to abandoned premises because that's definitely part of it. Abandoned premises defined. A landlord cannot evict a tenant without a court order, which we just said. However, a landlord can recover possession if the premises have been abandoned. The two circumstances in which a landlord can decide the premises have been abandoned. There's two bits here. One, there is no evidence that the tenant is occupying the premises other than the tenant's personal property in the premises, meaning maybe their car is gone, they haven't been seen in a while, etc. The tenant has not notified the owner that they will be absent, and the tenant fails to pay rent within 15 days after the due date. So that basically gives them 15 days to do something to show up. Otherwise, the landlord in Utah can deem that this has been abandoned. The second way is that they basically do a midnight run. The tenant's personal property has been removed from the premises, and the tenant has not notified the owner that they will be absent, and the tenant fails to pay rent when due. Yeah. So if that happens, either the above, either they do a midnight run or they just don't show up. Now, why would they not show up? Either maybe they're in jail, maybe they're hurt, they're in a hospital, maybe they just had to go leave somewhere, maybe they haven't, something terrible has happened. They could be incarcerated, they could be, kidnapped. Like weird stuff happens, right? But typically abandonment is not the norm, but it does happen, right? So if declaration of abandonment, 24 hours to respond. So if a landlord feels that the premises in one of the two ways is valid, then the landlord must serve the declaration of abandonment on the tenant in one of two ways. You've either got to deliver it to the tenant personally, if you know where they are, and you might, maybe, who knows, by mailing it to the registered or certified mail to the tenant at the tenant's residence, which is likely the rental unit. If the tenant is absent from the residence, by leaving it with a person of suitable age and discretion, and mailing it to the tenant at the tenant's residence, or if a person of suitable age or discretion cannot be found at the tenant's residence, by fixing it to a conspicuous place on the premises. Typically, I do shoulder height on the front door, and I tape it right on the door. And if the tape won't stick, if you're in like a cold climate, typically metal doors sometimes use magnets, or sometimes if you've got a door hanger, something, but I typically do it right at eye level. And so there's no question if you have to serve it. Okay. Now, typically when we're talking about abandoned items, you're talking about two things. One is typically a dollar amount. And below that dollar amount, the courts will deem that the items are basically disposable, worthless. They're not, they're not worth keeping, not worth storing, whatever. And then above that dollar amount is something that has to very likely be inventoried or sold or something. But typically there's a dollar amount. But the second thing that you're looking for as well is the time for storing, right? There's usually like a day limit that you've got to store the items and try to get a hold of the tenant the whole time. And so as we proceed in this, just know that that's kind of what we're looking at is we're looking for a dollar amount, like a threshold, and then we're also looking for a time, right? Okay, so we're looking through this and it says landlord's not required to store basically any animals or anything combustible, any hazard perishable items. They must be disposed of immediately upon termination. Well, maybe not the animals. Yeah, or anything hazardous. They talk about removing a motor vehicle. Maybe a tenant has just straight up left their car, left their motor vehicle, or if it's derelict, they can have the vehicle towed, and they define motor vehicle in here too. That's kind of cool. Let's see. Recovering a tenant's personal property. If the landlord, okay, so here it is. So if the landlord has removed and stored the tenant's personal property, the tenant may recover the personal property within 15 calendar days from the date of notice by paying the landlord's cost to move and store the property. So they not only do they have to say they have to communicate, but they then have to pay the fees on all the storage stuff. Tenant's liability for money damages if the premises have been abandoned. Under the Utah Code, the section, a tenant who abandons the premises is liable for the lesser of the rent for the remainder of the term, or the rent accrued during the time necessary to rent the premises at fair market value, plus the difference between fair market value and the rent agreed, plus a reasonable commission. Basically, all of the costs to re-rent it, even if you up the rent. Interesting. So, well, and you know what? That's pretty reasonable. The only problem is that if the tenant has abandoned the unit, the likelihood of you actually finding the tenant successfully and getting a judgment and then getting money might be low, right? So, yeah, interesting. I'm just gonna take a note here. Unit is liable for the rent remainder of the term. And then plus the time that it's vacant and then re-rent it. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, let's go to the next item or the next, let's see, refunding renters' deposits. Here we go. Refunding renters' deposits. We haven't talked at all about security deposits yet. Okay. Refunding security deposit. Okay, what a landlord can keep. Your landlord can use your deposit to pay for rent you didn't pay, damage that you caused that was intentional or malicious, nor more than just normal wear and tear, cleaning, and other things that you agreed to in your lease. Yes. Okay, so in Utah, a landlord can keep the security deposit for rent due. Yep. And then when you get your money back, your landlord must give you your deposit within 30 days after you move out. Make sure you tell your landlord where you moved. That's actually very important. The landlord should send the deposit to your last known address, which could even be the rental unit, and it should get forwarded. Or the landlord can send it to you electronically if you give the landlord a way to do that. In the States, it would be like a Venmo or a Zelle. In Canada, it would be like an e-transfer. Either way, you've got electronic means, of course. In addition to your deposit, the landlord must provide the balance of any prepaid rent and written notice itemizing and explaining any deductions from the deposit or prepaid rent. And if the landlord does not follow the rules, then they talk to you about there's actually a there's a forms section. Okay, we'll go through that here in a second. That's cool that there's forms. There's a lot of places where there's not pre-made forms, and that's kind of hard. Talks about how to serve if the landlord does not respond to the notice. Tenant's notice to provide. Is this it? Yes. Okay. Tenant's notice to provide deposit disposition. Let's look at this. Okay, so this is a pre-made form. Oh, you'd actually have to fill it. You can't actually write in it. I don't think. Let's see, can we do it? No. Got to print it out and write it. That's kind of tough. Anyway, so tenant's notice to return deposit to the owner. So this is basically from the tenant to the landlord, the address that, hey, this is basically a demand letter from the tenant to the landlord saying, hey, you owe me this security deposit. Or landlord may electronically provide refund and notice of any deductions. Here, this is a legal document. Okay. And then return of service, owner's address to which service was affected, and person completing the service. Interesting. Okay. That makes sense. If your landlord, let's see, if the landlord does not respond to the notice, basically the demand notice that we just went through, then you can sue them in small court or small claims court. The tenant could get your full deposit back, any rent paid ahead of time, and an extra $100 and money to pay the lawyer if the court finds your landlord acted in bad faith. And then it's got a hyperlink on small claims, how to get a small claims thing started. Because remember, a security deposit is not your money, it's the tenant's money. Okay, we're going to keep going. Eviction information for landlords. We actually already clicked on this one. All right, let's go to the next one. I think this one's going to talk about abandoned items. We've already gone through this one as well. And let's see. Okay, there's some things that we haven't figured out, like what's the amount of the security deposit? We haven't gotten that far yet. And then I've pulled up the next hyperlink, which is utahlegalservices.org. This, they've got a tab that's just nothing but housing. And so they've got eviction basics, which again, they're geared towards tenants. So eviction, are you being evicted? Does your landlord say you must leave? Housing videos, short videos. In fact, let's do this. Common landlord tenant myths, criminal trespass by a long-term guest, domestic violence lease termination, rent increases. Now, this is important because rent increases is definitely on the bingo card. We have not talked about it at all. If your rent is legally increased and you receive a 3 or a 5 day notice to pay or vacate after failing to pay the increased amount, you must pay the increase and all late fees imposed by a written agreement, or you risk being evicted. Once the 3 or 5 day calendar period has expired, you lose the right to cure the default by paying, and the landlord can evict you. Okay, so in fact, let's click on that one and see what happens. So there's a whole big article on this about what to do. What if I did a lot of work on there? Okay, yeah. Raise the rent. Talking about a little bit about Section 8, subsidized housing. It doesn't say how much you can raise the rent though. And let's go common landlord tenant myths. This is interesting. So this is, oh, it's a bunch of videos. That's cool. All right, well, let's play one. Um, oh, it's 8 minutes. Well, I might throw this in here.
Stop you right there. Eviction law varies wildly from state to state, and the outcome of an eviction lawsuit can change wildly based on even small differences of wording from one state's laws to another. To use our earlier example, unless your lease says otherwise, landlords have to give you 24 hours notice before they enter your apartment.
Right. Okay. I'm not going to watch all that. These look like some great assets. This is actually really good that they've got this on here. Now remember, this is legal aid, right? And so they want you to have this. Then housing videos. So there's common landlord myths. Let's see if there's any more. And it looks like they have them in multiple languages. Looks like English and Spanish. Oh, they have a whole bunch. Wow. Well done. Lots of videos in English and Spanish. Well done, Utah. I have no idea why you've got all the different languages, but that maybe shows my ignorance. Okay. Compliance notice, non-payment of rent, nuisance notice, basically mischief, and they're telling you to smarten up. Cool. If you are a Utah landlord and you have not watched those, you might want to do that if you've got questions, especially if you're new, you might want to do that. Okay, bad housing. If your landlord does not fix something that needs to be repaired, you have options, but be careful. You could end up getting evicted if you don't follow the proper steps. You basically got to give proper notice that you need some things repaired, especially if they're not, safe and habitable. Remember that was the first line in the tenancy law that we saw. Okay, I've got two more hyperlinks here. I don't feel like we've actually answered everything on the bingo card yet, but that's okay. We'll go as far as we can. So this is the rental Association of Utah. Yeah, Utah Rental Housing. And so this is rhautah.org. And I always throw this in because for landlords, if there's an association of some kind, whether it's an apartment association, renter association, landlord association, like whatever it is, it's usually a good place to either find um, documents and find resources, or they likely have events and they're educational, right? And so this one, in fact, they're saying fair housing conference and trade show. Well, that sounds cool. Yeah, because I'm a big nerd and have a landlord podcast, right? So it talks about what exactly it is. It's a nonprofit trade association with the goal to elevate rental housing professionals. Okay. Oh, and it's got a video on the history of it. And then they've got their advertisements. Well, that's cool. So if you need a contractor, depending on what you're looking for, here's a whole bunch right here. I mean, that's sort of the name of the game. I mean, in fact, there's been so many times where we have gone to networking events, and the number one question is, what problem are you trying to solve? And there's usually everybody's got something they're working on, right? And so that's something that you absolutely want to network about, right? And so some of this is just straight advertisement. You don't necessarily need all this, but cleaning services, that's pretty cool. All right. And I bet they have membership stuff too. Yeah, they do. Events, education, they have all kinds of events. Wow. Let's see. Calendar view. Let's see what's going on here. Wow, they have a whole bunch. Single family, good landlord. Okay. Very nice. What's this one? Fair housing. Yeah, Fair Housing Conference and Trade Show. See, that's the kind of thing, whenever that comes up, either on Maui or in BC or wherever I am, I'll go to that because I will always learn something. And then, of course, guess who's in the room? Other landlords. So that's good, right? Okay. Then the last one I've put in here is the Utah State Bar. Just because in case you need some legal advice, sometimes you don't need a whole lot. Sometimes you just need a little bit of a guidance. You need like a 30-minute consult that'll cost you, 50 or $100. You don't actually have to hire them. You just need a little guidance. Might be an option for you if you are looking for that. Right now, I did not go. I'm going back to the courts here because I didn't see any helping um, like contact information for court stuff, but self-help forms. Let's go to forms. View form resources. Court forms, my paperwork, court specific forms, self-help center. I bet we're going to get to housing. Oh, here's a whole bunch. Self-help center services. So there's a whole bunch. There's emails, there's a phone number. You can even text them. That's cool. And so you can actually text them or call them, contact the courts, and then say, hey, my problem is this. What should I do? Where should I go? And they'll at least give you some kind of option, which is cool. Self-help, represented parties, planning for emergencies, my paperwork, getting a divorce. Yeah, not everything is housing, right? Here's housing and evictions, appeals, consumer court rules, government agent, housing and evictions again, which I think we've gone through most of these already. Now we haven't answered the whole bingo card yet, though, so we've got to go back a bit. But we did find the contact information for the court. which is cool. And that's the extent of their forms. That's interesting. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and search. I'm back on the Utah State Legislature to the code that is the landlord tenant rights in Utah. And I'm going to search for security deposit because I don't know how much it is supposed to be. What's the maximum it could be? Hmm. Landlord communication amendments. Return of that. Hmm. Just going to put security deposit amount, see what is in there. And what's coming up is just the word either security or amount, like social security or like security of a building, right? And so it's not actually coming up. You know what? I'm just going to straight up go to search and just go, how much is the security deposit in Utah? 1 to 2 months rent. So it says there's no statewide limit that the landlord can charge for the deposit. So they're saying it's a reasonable amount. Okay, so 1 to 2 months rent, no statewide. Okay, now let's talk about, and of course they pull all this. This is AI that pulls this stuff, right? So that's what supports it. So I'm going back and making sure. And it says everybody says about the same thing. So that must be it. I didn't find it in the actual law. Okay, so how about rent increase permitted in Utah? How much and how often? Okay, so typically it's saying in Utah, landlords can generally raise the rent to any amount they choose. Isn't that lovely? Provided they follow the proper legal procedures. Here's the key points in rent increases. Notice requirements. If you're on a month-to-month lease, the notice period is typically 15 days. That is probably the fastest one. So if the landlord wants to jack up your rent, um, rent increase notice for month to month is 15 days. So, like, wow, that's almost unreasonable. That's interesting. Rent increases during fixed term lease are only allowed if both the landlord and the tenant agree in writing. And typically, if you're in a fixed term lease, you can't change the terms. You're in an agreement. But there is no cap on increases. Can raise it amount. But it says starting in May of 2025, if a rent increase exceeds 10%, landlords must provide at least 60 days notice. Okay. Increase 10% rent? Come on, folks. Really? 60 days notice. Even that's not a lot. But you don't necessarily want to go too much further than that. And then how often? How often can a landlord in Utah increase the rent? Do a rent increase. They can increase it as often as they choose. That's nice. It is landlord friendly, but at the same time, it can be a little bit disheartening because you could jack up the rent to somebody and they could give notice and gone, and now you're dealing with an empty unit or turn in the unit. But maybe you want that if you are trying to deal with um, under market rentals, right? Doesn't appear that that's a problem in Utah. Okay, let's get back into our bingo card here because I think we've hit most of the high points, and I think we've talked about just about everything we possibly can on the bingo card. If we haven't, I'll jump back in. So I'm going to continue to screen share. If you're watching on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, I'm going to continue to screen share, but we're also going to talk about the bingo card stuff. Okay, let's kick it off. Application fees. Tenant application fee is allowed, not capped by state law. Landlords may charge any reasonable application screening fee they choose. Typically, it's non-refundable, but come on, you've got to actually do something with it, like a record check or something. But it doesn't appear that Utah requires that they actually do something with it. Rent timing, late fees, grace period. There's no statutory grace period. Geez, wow. Whew. Rent can be late immediately after the due date set in the lease, and the late fee can apply once late, subject to notice for some month-to-month tenancies. We already went through the maximum late fee is the greater of 10% of the rent amount or $75. Charging more is prohibited. And you must have the late fee in the lease. So this is important. If you're a Utah landlord, make sure you've got it spelled out in there. Security deposits. Utah allows security deposits. There's no cap on the amount, no requirement that the deposits be held in a separate account or a surety. A bond, other places require a bond instead, but that's, yeah. Landlords must account for and return the unused portion within 30 days. Now, this report is different than what we just searched up, where it said typically security deposits is 1 to 2 months. This one says there's no cap on the security deposit amount, which may be true, but it seems like it's best practice is 1 to 2 months. If you've got a question, make sure you are asking folks at the rental association that I mentioned. That's a good spot that you would say, hey, what's a reasonable amount to charge for a security deposit? Also, if you charge a whole bunch for a security deposit and you make it too expensive for your tenant to get into the rental, then they will likely walk. You don't want to do that for a good tenant if you screen them properly. Lease content and form, lease wording and details. Utah permits oral or written agreements generally, but leases longer than 1 year must be in writing. A solid Utah lease typically includes rent amount, due date, security deposit, conditions, utilities, fees, lease term, pet rules. That's the first time we've seen the word pet, and required disclosure for maintenance and late fee terms. We talked about this, required disclosure like landlord's name, contact information, etc. There's no explicit statute requiring delivery of a signed lease back to the tenant, but standard practice is that both parties sign and each receives a copy. Strongly advisable for enforceability. I agree. Typically, if we're signing in person, then we would print out 2 copies and everybody gets an original. But most of the time, we're signing our leases electronically these days. And so it doesn't seem to be that big deal, but there are places that have a requirement for delivery of a signed lease once executed. So Utah does not have this, but if you're a landlord somewhere else, you need to make sure you are clear about this. But it's good practice anyway. You want to make sure that anything you agreed to that you deliver to the other person. Emergency contact, abandonment, incapacity. Is an emergency contact required? Utah law does not generally require collecting an emergency contact. However, it is good practice to do that, right? I say that, and I don't have that on some of my tenants, and I probably should. Utah law does not restrict landlords from charging separate pet deposits or pet rent. You can charge pet deposits or pet rent. And condition inspections at move-in, no statute requiring a written move-in inspection checklist, but it is standard best practice and often built into lease templates. Be careful. I didn't see an actual lease template provided by the state. And so you might either find one at one of the associations I mentioned, or you could hire a lawyer to draft one up, or you can just Google it and try to do the best you can. But again, if you're trying to DIY and you do it wrong, you're going to have a lesson to learn. So just be careful about that. Let's see. Required maintenance inspections in Utah, no. Condition inspection at move out, not legally required, but if you intend on keeping all or part of the security deposit due to damages, you must inventory, and it's a good idea to do the condition inspection. Now, best practice is make sure you're doing the condition inspection as a written inventory type thing, and then pictures and videos also. Don't substitute the written stuff for just the pictures and the videos. That doesn't typically work. It looks like it works in Utah, but be careful. Standard warnings or forms. Utah does not provide one universal set of statutory warning letters. However, we did find that just the one form of the tenant demanding the security deposit back from the landlord within 5 days. We talked about rent increases. I didn't see anything about renter's insurance. We did not talk about abusive access for a landlord. However, it did talk about reasonable entry and proper notice of going in a unit. You've got to have proper notice, but it did not define landlord retaliation. Landlord retaliation is when a landlord is basically taking out on the tenant if the tenant has turned them into some code enforcement or joined a tenants union or done something else. and the landlord wants to retaliate in the form of decreasing services, increasing rent, or trying to evict them. It does not, it was not defined that I saw, but according to this report, Utah recognizes wrongful retaliation concepts, but there is not a broad, explicit timing-based anti-retaliation framework like in other states. Exactly. Yeah. End of term, early termination, acceleration clauses. The If the lease says it becomes month to month on expiration, that controls it. Otherwise, a fixed term lease typically ends on its stated date without automatic conversion, and the tenants must vacate or reach a new agreement. Month to month tenancies can be ended by either party within 15 days notice. Boy, that's fast. Like, that's really fast. Utah law does not prohibit acceleration clauses. So, boy, Utah can do all kinds of stuff. An acceleration clause is if somebody terminates a lease early, like a fixed term, then they're 6 months into a 1 year lease and they say, you know what, I've got to go, I'm leaving, then typically in Utah, it looks like acceleration, meaning the rest of the rent is due that is in the lease. Now, typically, what we've seen is instead of people paying that, they just try to re-rent it themselves, and that way the landlord is not out. But seen it both ways. In Utah, it doesn't appear that there is a prohibition to that. Hmm. Okay, talking about deposits that move out, and then we are almost done with our bingo card. Looks like 30 days. A landlord must return the remaining deposit and itemized deduction within 30 days after a tenant vacates and or required written demand forwarding address if a lease requires one. Can you use the deposit as last month's rent? Yes or no? And the answer is yes. But Utah law allows party to decide this by contract, which means you could potentially put it in the lease in the origination, right? You could potentially say, hey, if you're out, you agree that the security deposit could be used as last month's rent. However, you want to be careful doing that because if there's damage, then there's nothing to pay the damage. So be careful when doing that. Eviction and timing. It looks like everything, if there is mischief involved, like there's the tenant's misbehaving or the rent is late or serious criminal activity, it's a 3 day pay or vacate or basically pay or smarten up notice. 3 days. Wow, that's awesome. They're not fooling around. They are not fooling around. Just taking some notes here for the summary. And then abandoned property. I think we covered that pretty well. Yeah. Okay, let's wrap it up here. Each of my location-specific podcasts is set up in the exact same way, answering the same four questions. What are the basics of the tenancy laws in that state? In this case, Utah. What are the nuances in that state? And then some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant. And then finally, where to get help in your local real estate area in Utah. And as I did that, you saw me keep track on the bingo card of standard items, and there was a lot in there in Utah that just does not apply. It's actually quite landlord friendly, which is pretty interesting. And I have to remember, I don't think it's in my list of most US friendly states, but it might be. Okay, I'm gonna have to go back and look at that because we just did episodes on that. One more time, this episode is not all inclusive. You must do your own research. I'm just getting you started. I am not a landlord in Utah, so I am not the expert, but I can help you figure things out. And it seems like there is a lot of leeway, but you want to be reasonable. You don't want to scare away tenants. You want to still be a good human. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're either new to real estate in Utah or you want to be. Things you can do to help yourself are make sure you are familiar with the Utah residential tenancy laws, and then get in the room with other Utah landlords, either literally or figuratively, literally in the form of meetups and conferences like we saw, or you can get onto Facebook groups, social media groups, and talk with other landlords. Hopefully, other Utah landlords. I didn't check social media for Utah specific groups, but they may be there. So make sure you're checking yourself and get out there and start asking questions. Typically, landlords want to help other landlords, but the landlords can be nasty too. You can also get people making snarky comments on, what to do or what not to do. So as you're learning, just know that that's part of the process. You're going to make some mistakes. That's okay. That's how you learn. Just try to minimize them and try to not make them too expensive, right? Yeah. Well, I hope that you enjoyed today's show all about Utah. Don't forget to subscribe to My Life as a Landlord for more advice and real estate stories from all over the globe. I'm recording this today sitting here in a Kona low storm as it's flooding over on Oahu and the west side of Maui. Why? Because real estate takes you places, and where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode live right now in the library, episode 225, about the great state of Maryland, where I was born. Yay! We'll see you there.